One night changed everything, and by morning, she had nothing. Grace Whitmore was a loyal secretary, invisible in boardrooms, but irreplaceable behind the scenes. She wasn't chasing power, only a bit of dignity, a way to provide for her ailing father and live quietly. But one mistake, one vulnerable night with her engaged CEO, and suddenly she was branded a threat, fired, discredited, pregnant, publicly humiliated in front of the very people she once served without question. No job, no partner, no safety net. Now imagine this. You're alone, carrying twins, your reputation ruined, your father slipping away from memory, and the only thing you own is your silence. What would you do? This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about resilience, about how one woman walked away not to hide, but to rebuild, and how, years later, she returned, not to destroy the past, but to outgrow it. If this story moves you, please take a moment to like, comment, and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Now, take a deep breath and step into the quiet strength of grace. What would you do if the man who praised your loyalty yesterday humiliated you in front of the entire executive board? Today, Grace Whitmore had worked in the same corner office of Kerrigan Foods for nearly 9 years. She knew every name on every extension, remembered every executive's coffee order, and arrived precisely at 7:45 each morning, never a minute late, never a hair out of place. Her desk was always tidy, her voice always calm, and her name was barely known outside the top floor. She preferred it that way. She didn't chase ambition. She chased reliability. And in Nathan Kerrigan's world, that was currency. Nathan, the CEO, with a jawline sculpted for magazine covers and a confidence that carried through every corridor. He was younger than most men in the room, but no one questioned his authority. Grace had spent years managing his calendar, cleaning up behind his public stumbles, and ensuring his empire ran without a hitch. She never expected to become a footnote in his scandal. It had happened 3 weeks ago, the annual distributor summit in Chicago, a 3-day whirlwind of catered dinners, late-night panels, and too many drinks poured into too many expensive glasses. Grace had stayed late as usual, organizing name tags, packing up gift bags, and making polite small talk with regional managers who'd had one glass too many. Nathan had lingered too, just him and Grace in the soft glow of the hotel lounge. He looked tired for once, human even, leaning back in his chair with his tie loosened and a quiet sigh escaping his lips. He thanked her for her hard work, not just that night, but all these years. And then, things blurred. A glass of wine, a long conversation, words not meant to be shared, a vulnerability neither of them expected, one moment of reckless closeness that neither of them could take back. It was supposed to be nothing, a mistake tucked beneath the carpet of executive silence. But Grace couldn't forget. 3 weeks later, she stood in her bathroom, staring at a thin white stick as the blue line deepened before her eyes. Her stomach sank not from nausea, but from certainty. She knew what she had to do. Nathan deserved to know. Not because she expected anything from him. She didn't want money or status or disruption. She just thought he had the right to hear it from her. She requested a brief meeting, just 10 minutes after hours. He agreed, his reply cold and curt, like a rescheduled flight. When the moment came, she sat across from his desk, spine straight, hands folded. Her voice was steady when she told him. Calm, almost clinical. But his response wasn't. He stared for a moment, then let out a dry, disbelieving laugh. Not kind, not nervous, cruel. You think I'm that stupid, he said, rising from his chair. This is your angle. You're not the first to try it. Grace. She blinked, her breath catching. You want leverage? A promotion? A buyout? You think this gets me to walk away from a merger and a fiancé? She tried to answer, but he reached into a drawer, pulled out a checkbook, and began writing. Take this, he said, sliding it across the desk. 100,000. You disappear. No press, no scandal. She didn't touch it. I'm keeping the baby, she said quietly. His expression hardened. By the next morning, she was called to an emergency board meeting. No explanation. No agenda. Every executive sat around the long table, their voices hushed, their coffee still steaming. Grace stood near the wall, unsure why she was even in the room. Then Nathan walked in, jacket off, sleeves rolled, his voice louder than necessary. This company has always valued integrity, he began, pacing slowly. And when someone abuses their position, when manipulation threatens the fabric of our leadership, we take swift action. His eyes flicked to Grace. Effective immediately. Grace Whitmore is no longer with the company. The room fell silent. A few eyes turned, some surprised, some already aware. No one spoke. Grace stood still, her breath caught in her throat. Then she turned and walked out, saying nothing. Her desk had already been emptied. A cardboard box sat waiting, her sunflower mug, a photo of her father, and the ceramic paperweight she bought at a flea market in 2012. Security didn't follow her. They didn't need to. Shame did the job just fine. As she stepped into the elevator, Nathan appeared again. He placed the same check, now folded on top of the box. Take it, he said. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she closed the lid. No words, no tears, only silence. Down in the lobby, the afternoon light spilled through the tall glass windows as she walked outside, heels clicking softly against the tile floor. She carried the box with both arms. In her chest, something ached, and in her belly, unseen, unknown. 2 tiny lives had just begun. It's not the cold that breaks you. It's the silence that follows when no one calls, no one believes you, and you've got nowhere to go. Grace Whitmore drove the entire way from Chicago to Des Moines in silence. No radio, no phone calls, just the hum of the road beneath worn tires and the steady ache in her lower back that reminded her again and again that she was no longer alone in her body. The cardboard box sat in the passenger seat belted in as if it too needed protecting. It held everything she hadn't been allowed to keep: a photo of her and her father at the Iowa State Fair, the mug she once refilled 3 times a day, and a check she still hadn't looked at since the elevator ride. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. But with each passing mile, her chest grew tighter, like sorrow had found its own seatbelt and refused to loosen. When she turned onto her father's street, the gravel crunched familiar beneath the wheels. The front porch sagged a little more than she remembered, and the shutters on the second floor had lost their color to sun and time. But the house still stood, stoic and waiting, like it had known she'd come back, eventually. Mr. Whitmore answered the door after the third knock, wearing a flannel shirt from decades past and a look of confusion. "Are you selling something?" he asked, blinking behind thick glasses. Grace smiled faintly. "No. Daddy. It's me." Recognition flickered and vanished. "Oh," he said softly. "Well, come in, I suppose." Inside, the air smelled of dust and old books. The kitchen clock had stopped. The fridge held 2 expired yogurts, a half stick of butter, and a single apple that had gone soft. Grace opened cupboards, finding instant oatmeal, saltines, and a jar of pickles. It would have to do for now. That night, she made them both soup from bouillon cubes and crushed crackers. Her father slurped quietly while she stared into her bowl, more tired than hungry. The next morning, Grace woke early to the sound of her father moving dishes around in the kitchen, trying to make toast in the microwave. She sat him down gently, then searched online for doctors, local assistants, part-time jobs, but nothing came easy. The insurance she had through Kerrigan Foods had vanished the moment she was fired. Cobra coverage was laughably unaffordable. She had no current prescriptions, no OB care, and certainly no income. Des Moines was smaller than Chicago. Smaller meant whispers moved faster. Employers knew one another. And Grace Whitmore, the woman who'd been escorted out of a boardroom and into a rumor, had become untouchable. She applied anyway. Data entry, grocery cashier, front desk at a dentist's office. Some didn't call back. A few did, but only to say they'd gone with a better fit. One woman, a manager at a boutique downtown, paused awkwardly before asking, "Weren't you in the news?" Something with Kerrigan Grace hung up before she could finish. By the end of the third week, her savings had dipped below $600. The gas tank hovered near empty. The heating bill came with a bright pink urgent stamp across the top. She started eating just one meal a day so her father could have two. One night, Grace found him trying to leave the house barefoot, looking for her late mother. She gently led him back to bed and sat beside him until he fell asleep. His hand curled into hers like a child. Her stomach ached not just from hunger, but from the pressure of growing life inside her. She felt it now, a flutter, then another, like the smallest of kicks. At first, she smiled, then she cried. At the free clinic, a nurse measured her vitals, pressed gently against her abdomen, and tilted her head. "You've been extra tired, right?" Grace gave a weak laugh. "That's one way to put it. Any history of twins in your family?" "No." Grace blinked. "Why?" The nurse turned the monitor, and Grace saw 2 heartbeats, clear, steady, separate. "Looks like you've got double the blessing," the nurse said softly. "Congratulations. Mom. The word echoed in the cold, fluorescent room like a thunderclap in an empty hall. 2 babies, no job, no partner, no insurance, and a father who sometimes forgot her name. Grace didn't speak on the ride home. She parked the car in the driveway, engine ticking as it cooled, and stared at the porch light flickering in the wind. Inside, her father slept soundly in his chair. The news whispered on the TV. The thermostat blinked, 61 degrees. She wrapped a blanket around herself and stepped into the small spare room once hers, now lined with cardboard boxes and old winter coats. She opened the bottom drawer of the desk and pulled out a worn notebook. Yellowed pages, bent corners, a faint scent of cedar from the pencils she once loved. She'd used it in community college for her Intro to Budgeting course. Back then, it had been filled with clean charts and optimistic plans for a career she never had time to chase. Grace smoothed a page with her palm. She didn't know much about apps, but she knew about surviving. She knew what it was like to count every dollar, to stretch a can of soup over 2 days, to ration medication, to write due dates on the backs of envelopes and pray they didn't bounce. And maybe, just maybe, she could turn all of that into something. Not for fame, not for money, but for women like her who didn't have the luxury of being rescued. She picked up a pencil, turned to a fresh page, and wrote the words "Homebright, budgeting for the rest of us." Outside, the wind howled against the windows. The radiator hissed like an old cat. Inside, something flickered, not on the screen, but in her chest. Not warmth, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. When life takes everything, all you can do is count what's left and make it matter. By the time November settled over Des Moines, Grace Whitmore had stopped waiting for help. No one was coming. No company, no lawyer, no old friend with a couch and a casserole. So she did what her mother used to say when winter crept through the windows. You layer up. You get through it. The babies were growing fast. Her belly was round and taut, shifting with little kicks and flutters that seemed stronger with each passing day. Her ankles ached, her back throbbed, but she moved. And when the HR assistant at the old Frost Hill Bakery finally called back and offered her a job cleaning industrial mixers from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., Grace said yes before asking about the pay. Minimum wage. No benefits, but it came with a locker, a badge, and a name on the schedule. That was more than most offered lately. She arranged her life in slices. Nights at the factory, mornings with her father, preparing oatmeal, making sure he took his medications when he remembered how to swallow. Afternoons filled with rest, when possible, and sorting out unpaid bills. Evenings were for counting pennies, ounces, contractions. She lived by lists. How much was left in the account? How long until the gas ran out? How many weeks until she would need a crib? How many spoons of soup to make it to Sunday? One night, during her 15-minute break, she found a quiet corner behind the dough racks and opened her old notebook. She'd begun charting her own expenses in a way she could track just ink and paper, but clear, honest. She listed what she earned each week, then gas, rent, groceries, diapers eventually, emergency savings, always $0. Some of the younger women on the crew noticed. How do you do that? One asked. Her name was Melanie. Early 20s, single mom, always tired, just helps me breathe, Grace said. The next day, Melanie handed Grace a crumpled envelope. Could you show me, For me inside were receipts and 2 wrinkled pay stubs. So Grace did. She sat at the break table with her pencil and ruler, organizing rows and columns. It wasn't perfect, but it made sense. Within days, 2 other women asked, then 5. By the end of the month, Grace had helped half the night shift figure out how to budget between 2 jobs, rising rent and formula prices. They began leaving notes in her locker. Thank you. I bought groceries without my card bouncing. I paid my electric bill early. First time ever, I didn't feel dumb asking you. For the first time in months, Grace didn't feel like a burden or forgotten. She felt useful. At the end of one shift, Melanie walked with her to the bus stop. You ever think of turning that into, a real thing, she asked. Grace chuckled. What's more real than a notebook full of survival math? No, I mean, like an app or something. Grace paused. She hadn't. That night, she stared at the ceiling as her father snored softly in the next room and the babies shifted inside her. She thought about all the women she'd met, quiet warriors balancing debt and dignity. Women who never got the fancy apps because they didn't understand them, or trust them, or have the time. What if there was something simpler, not flashy, not complicated, just honest? A ledger that listened. Days blurred into nights. Her belly grew heavy, her feet swollen, but her notebook grew too. She filled page after page with sample layouts, common categories, ideas from her coworkers. She even borrowed her father's old calculator and tried figuring out simple metrics. How many meals could be made with $20? What utilities were most flexible with late fees? What could be shared in a neighborhood like hers when she walked into the gas station down the road one bitter morning, wrapped in her oversized coat and holding $10 for gas and bread? She looked more tired than most women her age. The cashier, a woman in her late 50s with eyes soft from years of seeing too much, rang her up gently. You okay? Sweetheart, Grace smiled. Getting by? As she handed over the change, the woman paused, then reached under the counter and pulled out a bright yellow flyer. Local startup grant, she said. Women over 35 for ideas that help the community. Don't know if it's your thing, but you look like someone who's got something to build. Grace stared at the paper. Bold letters read, Community Roots Incubator, empowering women to rebuild from the ground up. She folded it carefully, tucked it between the pages of her notebook. That night, long after her father had gone to bed, Grace lit a candle and sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by notes, bills, grocery lists, and dreams. The wind howled outside again, but inside, it was quiet. And that silence no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like space being made for something new. She had no team, no laptop, and barely any sleep. But she had an idea, and 72 hours to fight for it. The flyer sat quietly on the kitchen table, its yellow edges curling from steam and time. Grace read it over and over again, like the words might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. Application closes in 3 days, with no computer, no high-speed internet, no tech team or glossy deck. Just a notebook filled with charts and pencil, and a laundry room with decent lighting. Still, something in her refused to walk away. That night, after her father fell asleep, watching reruns of Jeopardy, Grace pulled out her phone, the same cracked screen device she'd had for nearly 4 years, and began. The app crashed twice before it would even open the grant site. When it did, she typed with her thumbs slowly, laboriously, checking spelling and counting characters like gold coins. Her eyes burned, her belly cramped. The twins kicked every time she shifted, but her mind buzzed clearer than it had in months. She titled the proposal, Homebright, Budgeting Tools for the Working Invisible. She described the women she worked with, the ones who couldn't afford to overdraft, who budgeted by flashlight while babies cried in the background, who needed something simple, human, and kind. No ads, no jargon, no judgment, just space to breathe. By the second night, she'd written out her pitch in longhand and rehearsed it quietly while folding laundry. She had no microphone, no video editing app, just her phone's camera and a shaky tripod made from 2 cereal boxes and a rubber band. She filmed it in the laundry room because it had the best lighting and the quietest walls. She hung a navy blue blanket behind her to hide the peeling paint, and with one take barefaced, heart-pounding, Grace looked into the lens and told her story. She didn't cry, but her voice cracked when she said, I know what it's like to sit at the kitchen table with $5 and 6 needs. She uploaded the video at 2:07 a.m. on the third night, whispering a prayer under her breath as the spinning wheel finally turned green. Submitted. And then, nothing. Just a blank screen, a kitchen full of laundry, and a woman who hadn't slept properly in 4 days. The morning after, her father had a bad episode. He wandered outside without shoes, looking for a mailbox that hadn't existed in years. Grace found him down the street, confused and shivering, holding a handful of leaves. That night, she barely made it to work. The machines were louder than usual. Her back screamed, her ankles throbbed, but inside her chest was a flicker of something she hadn't felt since before the boardroom, before the betrayal. It wasn't hope, exactly. It was defiance, a quiet knowing that she'd given what she could. And maybe that was enough. Weeks passed. The world didn't shift. Her belly kept growing. Her father's memory kept slipping. The house remained cold in the mornings, warm in the afternoons, and full of little noises that only silence made room for. Then, one Thursday, the phone rang. Unknown number. She nearly didn't answer, but something in her hand moved before her mind could catch up. "Is this Grace Whitmore?" a gentle voice asked. "Yes. We'd like to congratulate you. You've been selected as one of our Community Roots recipients. Your project Homebright has been awarded $15,000 in startup funding. Grace blinked. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? The woman chuckled softly. You did it, Grace. Your idea made it. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she thanked the woman, wrote down the follow-up details, and set the phone down beside her. The radiator hissed quietly. The wind tapped the window once, then again. She placed a hand on her belly, firm now, alive with movement. We're going to make it babies, she whispered. Not rich, not famous, but maybe just enough. Not all revolutions are loud. Some begin at the kitchen table, between diapers and overdue bills. The first version of Homebright wasn't sleek. It wasn't polished or pretty or user-tested. It was a grid, just columns, rows, and big readable text. Rent, groceries, gas, unexpected medical, emergency, yes or no, no graphs, no login walls, and most importantly, no ads. Grace built it using a free online template and a second-hand Chromebook a volunteer from the grant program had given her. She'd never coded before, but she'd figured out how to use spreadsheets, and that was enough to fake the rest. The first night she shared it with Melanie and the other women from her night shift crew. They stared at the screen in silence. Then Melanie let out a small laugh. You made this. Grace nodded, suddenly self-conscious. It's not much, she said, but it works. Melanie tilted the screen toward her, pressed a few buttons, then said softly, Grace, this is everything. Word spread quietly, first among the Frost Hill cleaning crew, then to neighbors, cousins, women from church basements, and dollar stores within a week. Grace's inbox, still an old Yahoo address, was full of messages. Can I get the link? My sister's got 3 kids. This would help. It's simple. I like that. I don't feel judged using it. Grace never expected that to be the selling point, but it was. In a world full of apps that tracked you, pushed ads at you, gamified your every purchase, Homebright simply listened. It didn't ask why you bought instant noodles 5 times a week. It didn't penalize you for skipping savings. It didn't assume you had a credit card or a second chance. It just helped you see where you were, and maybe, gently, what could come next. By the time her twins were born, tiny, wrinkled, beautiful, Homebright had quietly reached over 300 users, all by word of mouth, all through women who spoke the same language of survival and stretch every dollar strategy. Her days became a blur of diapers, feedings, burping cloths, and short bursts of coding. Her nights were quieter now, no factory shift, but no easier. The twins, Cody and Daniel, didn't coordinate sleep very well. Still, every nap they took became a window for Grace to refine a new feature, a better entry form. A color scheme that didn't hurt the eyes, a printable budget sheet for the few who still didn't trust apps. She kept everything local, small, quiet. That was the point. Then, one morning in early spring, she received a message from someone named Bella Ross. Subject line: a coffee and a conversation. Grace nearly deleted it, but something in the wording, casual, thoughtful, made her pause. Bella introduced herself as a small-scale angel investor, former nurse, former single mom, now focused on projects that made life a little easier for women like I once was. She'd heard about Homebright from a friend who'd used it after a divorce. Grace replied cautiously, suggesting a Zoom meeting. Bella agreed. The woman on the screen had short silver hair and kind eyes. She wore no makeup, no designer necklace, just a plain blue sweater and a voice that felt like steady ground. They spoke for an hour. Bella asked about the app, not just the tech, but the why. Grace told her everything. The boardroom, the twins, the notebook. Bella didn't interrupt. She just nodded. When Grace finished, there was a long silence. Then Bella said, "I believe in what you're doing. I'd like to help you scale if you're open to that." Grace blinked. Scale. Bring in a developer. Polish the interface. Maybe get it on the app stores officially. Grace hesitated. Bella smiled gently. "I don't mean turn it into a startup circus. I mean help more women. On your terms." It was tempting. $15,000 had stretched far, but she was reaching the edge of what one woman and a baby monitor could manage. Her savings were still fragile, and the house needed repairs. "Still, I don't want press," Grace said quietly, "or investors breathing down my neck." Bella nodded. "Then don't take them. We'll keep it lean. Community-based." Grace smiled. A small one, but real. They agreed to stay in touch. For the next few months, Grace worked with a small volunteer developer. Bella connected her with another woman in her 50s, laid off from a corporate job, now looking for meaningful work. Together, they cleaned up the app, added accessibility options, and made sure it could run on even the oldest phones. The user base grew, slowly, organically. It wasn't viral, but it was valuable. And one night, as Grace rocked Daniel back to sleep while Cody finally dozed in his crib, she checked her email and saw a message from a nonprofit food supplier interested in piloting Homebright for our low-income employee wellness program. A corporate name followed, one she hadn't heard in a long time. Kerrigan Foods. Grace's heart skipped. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she exhaled and whispered, "Well, I guess we're not done yet." The past doesn't knock. It walks in, wearing a polished suit, and calls itself your opportunity. The email sat in her inbox for 3 days. She kept reading it in fragments, as if breaking the sentences down might soften their impact. "We're seeking a simple, community-rooted budgeting app to pilot among our warehouse and factory teams. Your work with Homebright was recommended through the Community Roots Incubator. This trial will be in collaboration with Kerrigan Foods." There it was. Kerrigan, like a bruise she hadn't pressed in years. She reread the sender's name, Elise Barron, Director of Employee Wellness. Grace knew the department. She'd built Nathan Kerrigan's weekly updates for them once, back when she still wore heels and hope in equal measure. She clicked on the sender's LinkedIn profile just to be sure. Elise was new, hired the year after Grace had disappeared from the company's hallways without a goodbye. Maybe she didn't know the story. Maybe that was her luck. Grace leaned back in her chair, the soft creak echoing in the quiet living room. Cody and Daniel were napping in their twin bouncers, soft breathing rising and falling in opposite rhythms. Mr. Whitmore dozed by the window, a paperback slipping from his lap. No one else knew what this email meant, but Grace did. A chance, a risk, and a ghost she thought she'd buried. She reached for her notebook, still the same one, and jotted down 2 columns. Pros reach hundreds of underpaid employees. Real-world testing. Exposure for Homebright. Cons Nathan. She paused, then flipped to a clean page and wrote only one word at the top. Power. Not the kind he had, but the kind she was building quiet, steady, made of lines and grit, not suits and threats. That night, after feeding the boys and checking her father's meds, she sent a reply to Elise. Homebright is open to exploring a pilot program. I propose we coordinate through my funding intermediary Brightfield Ventures for contracting purposes. Brightfield was Bella's idea. A shell name. A firewall between Grace and the past. Bella agreed to handle all communication. Grace would be the ghost this time. Present, but hidden. A voice on Zoom. A quiet hand in the code. At least that was the plan. The next few weeks moved like a slow tide. Emails exchanged, calls scheduled, pilot prep underway. Kerrigan's warehouse in Missouri had been chosen as the test site. 150 employees, most low income, nearly half were women, many single mothers. Exactly the kind of people Grace had built HomeBright for. Still, every update stirred her nerves. She avoided Elisa's calls whenever she could, letting Bella or the dev team reply. She told herself it was strategic, smart, but deep down, it was fear and memory. The boardroom, the check, the silence that followed. One evening, Bella called unexpectedly. Grace answered in a whisper, rocking Daniel in one arm. "You're not going to like this," Bella said gently. But Kerrigan's requesting a presentation at the upcoming Midwest Food Industry Conference in St. Louis. Grace froze. In person, they want to see who they're working with. Elise still hasn't made the connection. But I did some digging. Nathan will be there. He's under scrutiny lately. Something about investor pressure, poor staff retention. Grace swallowed, her throat dry. "You don't have to do this," Bella said. "We can decline the presentation and just run the pilot quietly." Grace didn't answer at first. The twins' soft breathing filled the room. Outside, wind rattled the porch swing, and inside her chest, something stirred, not panic, but steel. "I'll go," she said finally. "On one condition. Name it. They don't know my name until I walk on that stage." Bella exhaled. Done. The next 2 weeks were a blur of slide decks, prep calls, and rehearsals. Grace worked at night while her babies slept and her father watched old westerns. She had no assistant, no budget for design, no formal training. But she had the story and the numbers. HomeBright had reached 1,200 users, 80% returning monthly. Over half reported improved spending confidence. Most had never used a budgeting tool before. The data spoke softly but clearly. She booked a train ticket to St. Louis. Airfare was out of budget, and she didn't want to leave her sons for more than 24 hours. The morning she left, her father, clearer than usual, touched her shoulder and said, "Your mother would be proud, you know." She smiled through the lump in her throat. "I hope so," on the train. Grace kept her laptop open, adjusting final slides, checking transitions. When she arrived, the hotel felt like déjà vu. Tall ceilings, luggage carts, suits checking in, voices echoing off marble. She kept her badge turned backward until she reached her room. The keynote was scheduled for 11:45 a.m., just after lunch. She stood behind the curtain as the MC read her name from the card, Grace Whitmore, creator of HomeBright. A name not heard in those halls in years. She stepped onto the stage, and Nathan Kerrigan, seated 3 rows back, looked up, his face paled, his hands stilled, and Grace finally smiled. 6 years ago, she walked out with a box. Today, she walks in with a nameplate. The ballroom of the St. Louis Grandview Hotel gleamed like a memory Grace had tried to forget. Polished chandeliers, rows of crisp white chairs, and a backdrop of branded banners and empty promises. She stepped through the service entrance, flanked not by PR staff or assistants, but by her father wearing his best plaid shirt and carrying a folded newspaper and a double stroller holding Cody and Daniel, now both bright-eyed and full of questions she wasn't ready to answer. A volunteer guided them to the green room. "You sure you want them here?" Bella had asked over the phone. "I want them to see what standing up looks like," Grace had replied, "even if they won't remember it yet." She adjusted the twins' jackets, wiped applesauce off Daniel's cheek, and smoothed her dress. It was borrowed navy blue. Simple, unassuming, just like her. On stage, the MC introduced the session, Voices of Change, Real Solutions for Real People. First up, Nathan Kerrigan, CEO of Kerrigan Foods. He walked up confidently, dressed in a tailored gray suit that likely cost more than her rent. Grace watched from the side curtain, heart steady, gaze unflinching. Nathan greeted the audience with practiced warmth. "We are at a turning point," he said, clicking through slides of smiling factory workers, "and we believe the future belongs to those who prioritize innovation, transparency, and impact." The words landed with the polish of a media-trained executive. Grace knew those words. She'd written them once. He spoke of new initiatives, digital tools, employee outreach. He thanked community partners vaguely, no specifics, no names. And then, as the applause settled, the MC returned and announced, "And now, we welcome our final speaker for this session, Grace Whitmore, founder of HomeBright." The name echoed softly. A few turned to whisper. Some looked confused. Nathan froze. Grace stepped out. She didn't wear power heels or makeup, just her soft voice, her story, and the invisible armor of survival. Behind her, the screen lit up with a simple image, a grocery receipt, dog-eared and smudged. She began. 6 years ago, I stood in a different kind of room, one with closed doors, high voices, and a decision that changed everything for me. The audience quieted. I was a secretary, a single woman, a daughter, and, though I didn't know it yet, a mother. Her voice didn't waver. Her hands didn't shake. I was given a check to stay silent. I chose, instead, to listen to myself and to women like me who were counting coins at kitchen tables while being told they weren't budgeting right. Slides appeared women in uniforms, screenshots of HomeBright's humble interface, handwritten budget sheets. I didn't have a team. I had laundry cycles and 15-minute breaks. I didn't have a business plan. I had bounced checks and utility bills. A soft chuckle rippled through the room, some embarrassed, some awed. But I had something no algorithm could replicate understanding. HomeBright wasn't built in a boardroom. It was built between lullabies, over instant noodles, and under flickering kitchen lights. She paused, letting the silence settle. Today, HomeBright serves thousands of women across 5 states, and none of them had to explain themselves to be helped. There was no self-pity in her tone, no grandstanding, just truth. And so, when Kerrigan Foods approached us through a community fund, not by name, I saw an opportunity. She turned to look at Nathan briefly. He hadn't moved, his expression unreadable. I didn't say no, not because I forgot, but because I remember. And I believe people can change. Systems can change, but only if we tell the truth about where we've been. She nodded once, firm. This isn't revenge, it's return. A beat passed, and then, just as she clicked to her final slide, one showing the words, "Built for Us," a small voice piped up from the back of the room. "Daddy!" Then another daddy. "Look, Mama's up there." Gasps. Whispers. Nathan turned sharply, eyes wide. Cody and Daniel, unaware of the gravity, stood by Bella, waving with matching grins. Grace froze, hand still on the clicker. A second of raw silence fell. No explanation, no denial. Just a room full of executives and change-makers and 2 little boys who unknowingly delivered the truth Grace had never spoken aloud. She didn't look at Nathan again. She didn't need to. The truth had arrived in the most innocent voices, with no agenda, no calculation, just presence. She stepped away from the podium. No press statement, no dramatic exit, just the soft creak of the wooden steps as she descended, head held high, her father rising to meet her, one hand gently guiding the stroller. The audience remained still stunned, some ashamed, some moved. But Grace didn't look back. She'd already said what she needed to say. The rest was just echo. Some stories don't need revenge. They just need to be reclaimed by the one who lived them. The hallway outside the boardroom was silent, save for the muffled hum of an air vent and the faint echo of polished shoes against marble tile. Grace waited alone, a folder in her hands, her fingers calm. 6 years ago, she'd stood outside a room like this clutching a cardboard box, her cheeks hot with shame, her body already carrying life she hadn't dared speak of. Now she stood straighter, her steps sure. No papers fluttering in her arms, no tremble in her breath. The assistant nodded and opened the door. "He's waiting for you." Nathan sat alone at the long conference table, backlit by the gray Missouri sky. No assistants, no entourage, just him, still in a sharp suit, but the sharpness had dulled. Lines around his eyes ran deeper. His jaw, once confident, now looked clenched from wear. Grace walked in, her heels echoing softly against the floor. He stood, almost instinctively, and then hesitated. Grace. She gave a small nod. Nathan. A long pause settled between them like dust years of silence. Choices and wounds unsaid. "You didn't have to come," he offered. "I know," she replied. "But closure isn't something people give you. It's something you claim." She sat across from him. No barriers between them now, except the past. Nathan cleared his throat, tried to sound composed. "Your presentation, it surprised me." "It wasn't meant to," Grace said quietly. "It was just the truth." He glanced down, hands folding nervously. "I didn't know about the children until you didn't ask." She cut in, gently, not cruel, just fact. A silence stretched. Nathan shifted in his seat, reaching for words. Grace opened the folder in front of her. From it, she pulled a worn envelope and slid it across the table. Nathan froze. He picked it up, fingers grazing the flap, opened it. Inside was the check, the original one, 6 figures, written in his own hand, untouched. You never cashed it," he said, voice almost disbelieving. "No," Grace replied. "That money was meant to erase me. I couldn't spend it without betraying myself." He looked at her, stunned. "Why bring it back now? Because I don't need it anymore," she said, her voice like still water. "I have something more valuable than silence." He stared at the check, then at her. "You could have gone to the press. You could have sued. I could have." She agreed. "But that would have made my story about you, and I never wanted that." Grace leaned in slightly, voice calm. "I wanted a life. For my children, for myself. I wanted something that wasn't built on shame or secrets." Nathan's eyes dropped. His shoulders sagged, ever so slightly. "You're not the same woman who worked here." "No," she said. "She had to survive. I've learned to live." She pulled out a second envelope, crisp and clean. "This is why I asked for this meeting." Inside was a document, not legalese, not confrontation, a board motion. Nathan picked it up, scanning. Policy amendment. "Paid maternity leave for factory and warehouse workers," Grace said. "Flexible work arrangements for single mothers. Access to emergency grants for medical needs. Education stipends." He looked up. "You wrote this with help," she said. "I bought a minor stake in Kerrigan Foods through Brightfield. Less than 1%, just enough to make proposals, and to make sure I'm not ignored." Nathan exhaled slowly, laying the paper down. Why this? Why not sell the shares and walk away? Grace's voice softened. because walking away means nothing changes. I didn't come back to punish the past. I came back to rewrite the future for the women still walking these halls. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, eyes searching hers, he asked, "Why didn't you destroy me?" Grace smiled, not with triumph, not with pity, with peace, because if I'd made you my mission, I would have carried you with me. She let the words settle. I chose freedom instead. She stood, collecting nothing but her name and her dignity. Nathan watched her, but said nothing. There was nothing left to say. At the door, Grace turned back one last time. "I don't hate you. Nathan, I just outgrew you." She walked out. The check remained on the table, useless, heavy, silent. The truest freedom isn't found in titles. It's found in a quiet kitchen with people who call you Mom. The little house in Wisconsin didn't have much to say. It stood at the end of a gravel road, hemmed in by fields and whispering pines, with chipped blue shutters and a front porch that creaked when the wind blew just right. There was no security gate, no intercom, no brass nameplate, but inside there were muddy shoes by the door, crayons under the table, a calendar with handwritten notes like plant carrots, new moon and library day, bring cookies, and laughter, soft, spontaneous, full-bodied. It had taken years to arrive here, and just minutes to know it was home. Grace leaned against the kitchen counter, her hands dusted in flour, a warm cinnamon loaf rising in the oven behind her. Cody sat at the table practicing letters, his tongue poking out in concentration. Daniel argued gently with their elderly cat, who'd taken residence in his chair. Outside, her father shuffled along the garden path, humming an old hymn, a straw hat perched loosely over his thinning hair. The rhythm of their days was quiet, ordinary, and utterly sacred. Each morning, Grace rose before the sun, not to prepare reports or fight for approval, but to press her fingers into soil still cool from the night. She grew kale and carrots, tomatoes and marigolds. The boys helped in their muddy way, proud of every crooked bean sprout they discovered. She still managed Homebright from a distance, now handled mostly by her small, all-women team. They understood her rhythm. Zoom calls only on Wednesdays. No emails after sunset. No expansion unless it helped the people it was meant for. She no longer sought headlines. And when a business magazine called asking for the woman who stood up in silence, she kindly declined. "This story," she wrote back, "isn't mine anymore. It's been passed on quietly, like bread from hand to hand." Because now, Grace was writing something else. It wasn't a business plan or a TED Talk. It was a book, handwritten at first, then typed late at night when the boys had drifted off and her father dozed in his armchair with the radio humming static. The title came to her one morning while kneading dough after the fire. We Bake Bread. It wasn't about tech or corporate redemption. It was about women, grief, resilience, rebuilding. It held recipes, two both for food and for getting through things. If your heart is broken, start with something warm. Measure time, not in hours, but in healing. Always double the cinnamon. She printed a few copies at the town's tiny press, left them at the library and the local co-op. One ended up in a coffee shop in Madison, another in a shelter near Chicago. People wrote letters back, real ones, on paper. They didn't say, "You're famous." They said, "I felt seen. This helped. I read it to my daughter. That was enough. That was everything." One late afternoon in October, a small envelope arrived with no return address. The handwriting was familiar, sturdy, slanted. She didn't open it right away. Let it sit on the table next to her tea until the house was quiet. When she finally unfolded it, the letter was short. Grace, I've been thinking about what you said about outgrowing things. I suppose I'm learning now what that really means. Thank you. Anyway, Nathan. No apology, no request. Just 6 words that landed softer than she expected. Grace read it twice, then folded it neatly and tucked it between the pages of her book draft. She didn't feel vindicated or stirred. Just free. That night, she baked a fresh loaf with the boys. Let them pour too much sugar into the cinnamon. Let them lick the spoon. As the scent filled the house and twilight crept in, she looked around her kitchen, the soft hum of life, the fingerprints on the fridge, her father humming off-key in the living room. No title could match this. No boardroom could hold it. No past could undo it. She was no longer surviving. She was simply living. And that, at last, was enough. Success doesn't always look like a spotlight. Sometimes it's a toddler asking for another pancake. The smell of maple syrup and sizzling batter filled the kitchen before the sun had finished rising. The old farmhouse, tucked among whispering trees and dew-speckled fields, creaked gently in the autumn air. Grace stood at the stove in her flannel robe, flipping pancakes while humming an old Patsy Cline tune. Cody and Daniel, now 5 and full of opinions, sat at the breakfast table negotiating passionately over who got the blue cup. But I had it yesterday. Cody protested, brow furrowed. No, I had it. You had the green one. Daniel insisted, holding the cup like a trophy. From his corner by the window, Mr. Whitmore chuckled, sipping coffee black. 2 sugars, same as always. His memory still drifted sometimes, but the fog had thinned in recent months. He'd taken to carving wood animals again, one for each grandchild he claimed to remember clearly. Grace flipped a pancake onto a plate and set it in front of them. Boys, she said, wiping her hands, you both win. Blue cup gets washed after breakfast. Green one gets chocolate milk. Deal, they chorused in unison, all tension forgotten as they tore into their pancakes. She poured herself a mug of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching them, really watching. The light hit their hair just like it used to hit Nathan's. That truth no longer startled her. It simply existed, like freckles, like roots in the garden, a part of the whole. The check was gone. Shredded. The shares at Kerrigan Foods had been sold quietly to a women-led foundation. Her proposal had passed, and Grace never looked back. She didn't speak to Nathan again. But his letter still lived between the pages of her book. Homebright had reached nearly 10,000 users now, still small by tech standards, but still ad-free, still personal, still hers. The little book, After the Fire. We Bake Bread had been picked up by an indie publisher. She declined a big house. They wanted too much gloss, she'd said, and not enough truth. Now, her days were slow and sweet, teaching the boys to read, planting fall crops, baking with women from the town every other Saturday, hosting community dinners where no one asked about her past, only if she brought the cinnamon rolls. There were no spotlights, no stage, no applause, just peace. And peace, she had learned, was a victory far too quiet for headlines, but loud enough to echo through generations. Her father set down his mug and stood up, stretching. Think I'll take a walk to the fence line, he said. Sun's coming up nice. She kissed his cheek. Wear a scarf. That wind's tricky. The boys scrambled from their chairs. Can we go? 2 eat first, Grace warned. They nodded, mouths full of pancake. She sat down finally, letting her body relax. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was racing the clock, or proving anything, or running from something unnamed. She was just here, present, whole. As she sipped her coffee, Daniel climbed into her lap, sticky fingers and all. "Mom," he whispered, "we're proud of you." She blinked. The moment hung in the air like birdsong. Not "thank you," not "we love you," but "we're proud." Pride. From a child who hadn't seen her stand in boardrooms, who didn't know what it took to carry twins while building a business in silence, who hadn't watched her wipe tears from balance sheets and start again with nothing. And yet he knew. Children always know. Grace wrapped her arms around him, pressing her cheek to his hair, heart swelling with a kind of gratitude too big for words. She looked out the window, golden light spilling across the garden beds and distant hills, dew shining like tiny lanterns. She had fought, yes. She had lost, rebuilt, risen. But more than anything, she had grown, not into power, not into revenge, but into something softer, stronger, infinitely more lasting. She had grown into herself, and as the wind rustled through the trees and her family's laughter drifted into the day, Grace smiled to herself and thought, clear and quiet, "This is my empire." There comes a time in life when strength isn't measured by how loud we fight, but by how gently we choose peace. Grace's story reminds us that dignity doesn't come from titles, applause, or recognition. It comes from standing back up quietly, slowly, again and again when no one is watching. We all carry scars, some visible, some buried deep. And there may be chapters in our lives we wish we could rewrite. But healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about growing beyond it. This story teaches us that real success is not in revenge, but in reclaiming our voice, in building something meaningful, even if the world never sees it, in making peace with what hurt us, not to excuse it, but to finally set it down. And above all, it reminds us that the smallest victories, the soft laugh of a child, a warm kitchen, a handwritten note can hold more power than any spotlight ever could. So if you've ever felt forgotten, misunderstood, or pushed aside, let this story be your reminder. You're not too late, you're not too old, and your quiet life might just be your greatest triumph. Thank you for spending time with this story. If it touched your heart, even just a little, we'd be honored if you'd give it a like, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that heal and inspire. Your support helps keep these quiet voices heard. Until next time, take care of your heart and each other.